One of my horses got accused of a federal crime by an HOA president with a clipboard and a Wi-Fi connection. No, I'm not joking. It all started when I let them take a dip in my own pond, and suddenly I'm being accused of contaminating community water and harboring government property. She called the cops, brought in a fake inspector, and launched a live stream campaign like she was exposing some underground horse mafia. What was supposed to be a peaceful day turned into a reality show no one asked for, but somehow everyone watched. And trust me, it only gets more ridiculous from there. Ever had a neighbor try to turn a garden hose into a legal weapon? I want to hear your HOA nightmares in the comments. Buckle up, this one spirals fast. That particular Tuesday morning started like any other. I was leading my 3 horses, Thunder, a magnificent black stallion, Whisper, a gentle bay mare, and Storm, a spirited chestnut gelding, down to the pond for their daily swim. I also had 2 Border Patrol horses boarding here temporarily, Ranger and Scout, both beautiful chestnuts with the kind of training that showed in every step they took. The 5 of them loved their morning dip, and honestly, watching them splash around in that clear water was one of the simple pleasures that made all the hard work worth it. The sun was just hitting the water right, making it sparkle like diamonds, and the old wooden fence around my property cast long shadows across the grass. I was wearing my usual ranch attire, dusty jeans, worn boots, and a hat that had seen more summers than I cared to count. Then, Sharon Buckley appeared like a storm cloud on a clear day. This woman, about 38 years old, with an attitude bigger than Texas itself, came marching across my property line like she owned the place. She had her phone out, clearly recording everything, and was wearing what I can only describe as the most ridiculous HOA outfit I'd ever seen. Some kind of self-made vest with badges and patches that looked like she'd ordered them from a costume website. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, and she carried this clipboard like it was some kind of weapon. "Stop right there," she yelled, pointing at me and my horses with the dramatic flair of someone who'd watched too many police shows. "I'm Sharon Buckley, president of the Meadowbrook HOA, and you are in direct violation of community standards." I stopped walking and just stared at her for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. "Ma'am, I'm on my own property," I said, gesturing toward the weathered fence posts that clearly marked my land. "These are my horses, and that's my pond." But Sharon wasn't having any of it. She stepped closer, her phone still recording, and declared with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged in her life. "That pond is community property, and you're contaminating it with these animals. This is a violation of our clean community standards." The way she said clean community had this underlying tone that made my skin crawl, like she was talking about more than just the water. I pointed to the fence line again, my patience starting to wear thin. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of map you're reading, but this entire area is private property, has been for 3 generations. Sharon's response was to throw her hands up dramatically and shout, "I control this HOA and everything under the sky. You think you can just do whatever you want?" Without waiting for an answer, she pulled out her phone and started dialing. "I'm calling the police. This is animal abuse and trespassing on public property." I watched in disbelief as she actually went through with it, pacing around my property like she owned it, while yelling into her phone about dangerous animal abuse and property violations. About 20 minutes later, Tom Hargrove pulled up in his patrol car. Tom and I go way back. We grew up in the same town, went to the same high school, and he'd been out to the ranch plenty of times for barbecues and friendly visits. He stepped out of his car with that look cops get when they know they're dealing with nonsense but have to go through the motions anyway. "Morning, Wade," he said with a nod, then turned to Sharon. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem here?" Sharon immediately launched into this dramatic retelling of events, complete with arm gestures and references to her clipboard, claiming I was systematically destroying community resources and endangering public health. Tom listened patiently, then asked to see my property documents. I walked him over to the fence line and showed him the survey markers, the deed paperwork I keep in the barn office, and pointed out the clear boundaries of my land. "Sharon," Tom said, turning back to her with barely concealed irritation, "this pond is clearly on Mr. Thompson's private property. There's no violation here." But instead of backing down, Sharon's eyes lit up like she'd just remembered something important. While Tom and I were talking, I noticed her walking around near my house, and when I looked closer, I saw her rifling through my mailbox. "Hey!" I called out, but she was already walking away, tucking something into her oversized purse. After Tom left with a warning to Sharon about filing false reports, I went to check my mailbox. Sure enough, several pieces of mail were missing, including what looked like official correspondence. I found Sharon's footprints in the soft dirt around the mailbox, small, with a distinctive pattern on the sole that I'd remember. "You want to play games?" I muttered to myself, clenching my fists as I looked back toward where Sharon had disappeared. "I'll give you a game." The horses were still in the pond, oblivious to the drama, their gentle splashing the only sound in the suddenly tense air. But I had a sinking feeling this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The next morning brought a stack of official-looking papers under every door in our HOA community. Sharon had been busy overnight, crafting what she called an emergency community health notice that made it sound like I was running some kind of toxic waste operation instead of just letting horses swim in a clean pond. She'd somehow gotten hold of my livestock permits, the ones I was pretty sure she'd stolen from my mailbox, and twisted the language to make it sound like I was keeping animals illegally. The notice claimed I was operating an unlicensed commercial stable and contaminating shared water resources with agricultural runoff. Reading her dramatic interpretation of basic ranching activities was like watching someone try to turn a recipe for apple pie into a terrorist manifesto. Emily Carter, my neighbor and closest friend in this mess of an HOA, came by around noon with her own copy of Sharon's handiwork. Emily works at the local bank, keeps her property neat as a pin, and has the kind of sharp wit that can cut through nonsense like a hot knife through butter. "You see this garbage?" she asked, waving the papers as she walked up to where I was fixing a section of fence. "She's claiming your horses are a public health hazard and demanding the HOA fine you $15,000. Emily had her own beef with Sharon. Apparently, our fearless HOA president had fined her $200 for planting wildflowers that were inconsistent with community aesthetics. I swear, Wade, this woman has been editing videos and doctoring photos to make neighbors look bad. I've seen her do it." That afternoon, Sharon showed up again, this time with someone she introduced as an official HOA environmental inspector. This guy looked about as official as a $3 bill, wearing a wrinkled shirt, carrying a clipboard with no actual forms on it, and clearly nervous about whatever charade Sharon had roped him into. She was back to live streaming everything, positioning herself like some kind of investigative reporter as she directed her fake inspector around my property. "As you can see," she announced to her phone camera, "the defendant continues to operate this illegal facility despite official warnings. I watched from my porch as they measured random sections of my fence and took pictures of the pond from every possible angle." The whole performance was so ridiculous that I almost laughed, but then I realized Sharon was building towards something bigger. She had her fake inspector collect water samples in unmarked containers, take soil samples from areas that had nothing to do with where the horses swam, and document evidence of what she called systematic environmental destruction. When they got close enough to the pond, I could hear her coaching him on what to say for the video. "Make sure you mention the contamination levels," she whispered, apparently forgetting that sound carries over water. "And don't forget to emphasize the public health risks." Emily and I watched this circus from a distance, and she pointed out something I'd missed. "Look at how she's framing her shots," Emily said, squinting at Sharon's phone. "She's deliberately avoiding showing your fence line or property markers. She's making it look like the pond is in some kind of public area." This woman wasn't just delusional, she was crafty. Every angle, every shot, every dramatic gesture was calculated to support her narrative that I was some kind of rogue rancher terrorizing the community. The fake inspector wrapped up his investigation by declaring the water highly questionable and the operation potentially hazardous to community welfare. Later that evening, I got a call from the county animal welfare office. Apparently, Sharon had filed a formal complaint alleging that I was neglecting and abusing my horses by forcing them to swim in contaminated water. The inspector who came out the next day was a no-nonsense woman named Janet who'd been doing this job for 20 years. She took one look at my horses, healthy, well-fed, clearly happy animals, and shook her head. "Mr. Thompson, these are some of the finest horses I've seen in this county. Whoever filed this complaint was either mistaken or malicious." But even though she cleared me of any wrongdoing, the county still hit me with a $200 fine for incomplete documentation. Apparently, Sharon had reported that I was missing some minor permit that had actually filed months ago. The real kicker came when I noticed my neighbors starting to avoid me. Sharon's propaganda campaign was working. People who'd been friendly for years were suddenly crossing the street when they saw me, and I overheard conversations about that guy with the illegal horses and the water contamination problem. Sharon had turned me from a respected member of the community into some kind of pariah, all because she couldn't stand being told she was wrong about something. Emily and I spent that evening walking the fence line, and that's when we found them. Tiny cameras, badly hidden in the bushes near the pond. Sharon was surveilling my property. The next day brought Sharon's most outrageous stunt yet. She showed up with what looked like surveying equipment, probably rented from somewhere, and began measuring my property while live streaming the whole thing. "Today, we're going to establish the true boundaries of this disputed area," she announced to her camera, as if she were hosting some kind of legal reality show. She was deliberately knocking down sections of my fence, claiming they were illegally installed on community property. When one of my horses got spooked by the noise and nearly bolted toward the road, Sharon actually laughed and said, "Better keep an eye on those horses. Wouldn't want them to cost you money." I walked right up to her camera and looked directly into the lens. "You're recording this, right? Good. I'm performing for you." The look of confusion on Sharon's face was priceless. She thought she was the director of this little drama, but she was about to find out that I could play this game too. As I walked away, I heard her shouting at her phone, "You're finished, Wade, finished!" But I was already planning my next move. Sharon wanted to play with cameras and documentation? Fine, two could play at that game. That night, I sat on the porch with a mug of cold coffee, watching the horses sleep beneath the moonlight, while the weight of everything pressed down on me like a 1,000-pound saddle. For the first time since my father left me this land, I wondered if I was about to lose it all. Sharon had poisoned my name with neighbors I'd helped fix fences for over the years. I'd lost a major cattle buyer who'd been planning to purchase half my herd. And now there were whispers spreading through town that I might be involved in federal crimes. Even Thunder, my proud black stallion, had started acting skittish from all the stress hanging in the air like a storm cloud that wouldn't break. I had half a mind to pack up, sell the damn ranch, and disappear somewhere nobody knew what an HOA was. Maybe find a piece of land so far out in the middle of nowhere that the nearest Karen would be 3 counties away. But then I saw it. One of Sharon's cheap plastic cameras blinking red from the bushes like a smug little eye, watching me in my moment of despair. That's when something in me snapped. This wasn't just about property lines or pond water anymore. This was about a bully trying to destroy everything my family had built. And I'd be damned if I was going to let her win without a fight. The cameras Sharon planted around my property were about as subtle as a bull in a china shop, but they gave me an idea. If she wanted surveillance footage, I'd give her more than she bargained for. I pulled out the drone I'd bought last year for checking fence lines on the far corners of my property and set up my own little surveillance operation. Unlike Sharon's cheap plastic cameras hidden in bushes, my drone could capture high-definition footage from angles she'd never expect. The first night of my counter-surveillance, I hit the jackpot that would change everything. Around 2 in the morning, my motion sensors picked up activity near the pond. I launched the drone and followed the signal, keeping it high enough to avoid detection, but close enough to capture everything in crystal-clear detail. There was Sharon, dressed in dark clothes like some kind of bargain basement ninja, creeping around my property with a flashlight and what looked like evidence bags. She was collecting water samples, photographing the pond from multiple angles. And this was the best part, she actually climbed over my fence to get to areas she couldn't reach from the property line. For someone who'd been screaming about me trespassing on community property, she sure didn't have any problem trespassing on mine. The drone footage was comedy gold mixed with criminal evidence. Sharon skulking around like some kind of discount spy, constantly looking over her shoulder, and at one point actually falling into the shallow end of the pond while trying to get what she probably thought was a dramatic close-up shot. She climbed out, dripping wet, cursing loud enough for the drone's microphone to pick up language that would make a sailor blush. But the real treasure was when she pulled out her phone and started recording fake evidence, stirring up mud to make the water look dirty, arranging debris to make it look like the horses had damaged the area, and even dumping what looked like food coloring into the water to create an oil slick effect. I compiled the best footage into a comprehensive video and sent it to every member of the HOA board, along with a formal complaint about Sharon's trespassing and evidence tampering. Emily helped me draft the letter, and we made sure to use all the same official language Sharon loved throwing around. This documentation clearly shows systematic violation of private property rights and deliberate falsification of evidence for malicious purposes, we wrote, borrowing Sharon's own dramatic style. Within hours, I had calls from 3 board members asking for copies of the footage and apologizing for not seeing through Sharon's act sooner. But Sharon wasn't backing down. If anything, the evidence of her nighttime activities seemed to make her more desperate and reckless, like a cornered animal that knows it's running out of options. She organized what she called a community health inspection of my pond, complete with someone she introduced as an environmental specialist. This new player was even more obviously fake than her previous inspector. He kept looking to Sharon for cues, clearly had no idea what he was supposed to be testing for, and at one point asked her if water was supposed to be wet. The whole performance was live-streamed, naturally, with Sharon providing dramatic narration about dangerous contamination levels and immediate threats to public safety. Emily joined me for this particular circus, and she was in rare form. When Sharon's fake expert declared the water potentially toxic, Emily called out from the fence line, "Potentially toxic? Like your leadership skills?" When he claimed to detect harmful bacteria, Emily shot back, "The only harmful thing here is your acting ability." Sharon's face went red, but she couldn't stop the show without admitting the whole thing was staged. Her fake expert stumbled through the rest of his performance while Emily provided a running commentary that had me struggling not to laugh out loud, despite everything that was at stake. The climax of Sharon's environmental theater came when she tried to get her expert to declare the pond legally contaminated. I had my own recording equipment running, and I caught the moment when her actor dropped character completely. "Look, lady, I don't know what you want me to say," he said, clearly frustrated and probably realizing he was getting involved in something legally questionable. "It's just water. Clean water. I'm not going to lie and say it's contaminated when it's obviously not." Sharon immediately cut her live stream and had what I can only describe as a minor meltdown, yelling at the poor guy about sticking to the script and understanding the bigger picture we're trying to paint here. After her expert packed up and left, looking embarrassed and probably reconsidering his life choices, I approached Sharon with my phone recording. "That was quite a performance," I told her, making sure to capture her reaction on video. "Your actor seemed a little confused about his role in your little drama." She spun around with pure fury in her eyes and snapped, "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can just document everything and make me look bad?" I smiled and held up my phone. "I think I'm smart enough to record everything that happens on my own property, just like you've been doing." The look of realization that crossed her face was priceless. She was starting to understand that her little game had more players than she'd counted on, and not all of them were playing by her rules. She was used to bullying people who didn't know how to fight back, but she'd picked the wrong rancher to mess with. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she hissed, but there was something different in her voice now, a hint of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. That evening, I uploaded my drone footage to a secure cloud drive and sent links to the HOA board, Tom Hargrove, and Emily. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Board members who'd been taking Sharon's complaints seriously were suddenly asking hard questions about her methods and demanding explanations for the obvious evidence tampering. Tom called to tell me he was opening a formal investigation into the false reports and trespassing incidents, and Emily texted me a screenshot of HOA chat messages, where neighbors were finally starting to see through Sharon's act and asking uncomfortable questions about her behavior. "The tide is turning," Emily wrote in her message. "Sharon's about to find out what happens when you try to direct a movie with unwilling actors and a script full of lies." I sat back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. The horses were safe in their pasture, the pond was clear and clean despite Sharon's attempts to make it look contaminated, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I might actually win this fight. Sharon thought she was the director of this drama, but she was about to discover that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself. Sharon's environmental theater had backfired spectacularly, but instead of backing down, she doubled down in the most unexpected way possible. The next morning I woke up to find a news van parked outside my property gates, and a reporter with a microphone trying to get footage of my controversial horse operation. Apparently, Sharon had reached out to local media with her story about environmental contamination and illegal livestock operations, and they'd bought into her narrative enough to send someone out for what they thought would be a quick community interest story. The reporter, a young woman who clearly hadn't done much research beyond Sharon's press release, approached me with leading questions about community concerns and environmental impact. I patiently explained that I was a licensed rancher on private property, showed her my permits and property documentation, and invited her to see the horses and pond for herself. But the damage was already done. The news story that aired that evening made it sound like I was running some kind of questionable operation that had divided the community. Even though they included my responses, the framing made me look defensive, and Sharon came across as a concerned citizen fighting for community welfare. The news coverage had immediate consequences. A cattle buyer who'd been negotiating a major purchase called to cancel, citing concerns about the controversy surrounding my ranch. Another potential client who'd been considering boarding horses here decided to look elsewhere. Sharon's campaign was starting to cost me real money, and she knew it. Emily stopped by that afternoon with more bad news. She'd seen Sharon making the rounds to neighbors, showing them printed screenshots of news coverage and claiming vindication for her crusade against my illegal operation. That's when I decided to take a closer look at my mailbox situation. I'd been so focused on Sharon's obvious antics that I hadn't thoroughly investigated what she'd stolen during her first visit. I went through my mail records with the post office and discovered that several pieces of official correspondence had gone missing, including renewal notices for various permits and, this was the big one, a letter from the Border Patrol about the 2 horses I was boarding for them. The letter contained details about the temporary boarding arrangement and instructions for care, exactly the kind of official documentation that someone could misinterpret or manipulate for their own purposes. I immediately called Tom and reported the mail theft, providing him with the postal records and my drone footage of Sharon's property intrusions. Tom was genuinely angry. Mail theft is a federal crime, and he'd been getting increasingly frustrated with Sharon's escalating antics. "Wade, I've been dealing with this woman's false reports for months," he told me. "She's filed complaints against half the neighborhood for everything from lawn height to holiday decorations. This mail theft gives me something concrete to work with." He promised to open a formal investigation and advised me to document everything going forward. Meanwhile, Emily was doing her own detective work. As a bank employee, she had access to public records and a keen eye for financial irregularities. She'd been digging into Sharon's background and discovered some interesting details about our HOA president's past. "Wade, did you know Sharon used to be a real estate agent?" Emily asked when she came by that evening. "She lost her license 3 years ago for falsifying documents and manipulating property assessments. Apparently she was caught editing photos and documents to inflate property values and hide problems from buyers." That revelation put Sharon's behavior in a whole new light. This wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. This was someone with a proven track record of document manipulation and evidence falsification. Emily had also discovered that Sharon had been using the HOA's official letterhead to send threatening notices to neighbors, some of which contained completely false claims about community rules and regulations. "She's been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom," Emily explained. "And she's been getting away with it because most people don't want to fight with their neighbors." The next day brought Sharon's boldest move yet. She organized another HOA meeting, but this time she had what she claimed was a smoking gun. She stood up in front of the assembled neighbors with her ever-present clipboard and declared, "I have proof that Wade Thompson is not only violating environmental regulations, but he's also harboring government property illegally." The room went silent. "Those horses in his pond aren't just regular horses. They belong to the Border Patrol, and he's been keeping them without authorization." My heart stopped. Sharon was holding up what looked like official Border Patrol correspondence, and while I couldn't see the details from across the room, I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what she was waving around. The letter about Ranger and Scout, the 2 Border Patrol horses I was legitimately boarding under a proper agreement, had somehow become ammunition in Sharon's war against me. She was twisting the legal boarding arrangement into something sinister, and, from the looks on my neighbors' faces, they were buying into it. "This man," Sharon continued, her voice rising with dramatic flair, "has been hiding federal property on his ranch and using it for his own purposes. This is not just an HOA violation, this is a federal crime." She was live streaming the meeting, naturally, and I could see her feeding off the shocked reactions of the audience. Emily tried to stand up and object, but Sharon cut her off. "The evidence speaks for itself. Wade Thompson is finished." The way she said it, with such triumphant certainty, sent a chill down my spine. Whatever game Sharon was playing, she thought she'd just played her winning card. I spent that night pacing around my ranch, trying to figure out how Sharon had turned a legitimate Border Patrol boarding agreement into evidence of federal crimes. The 2 horses in question, Ranger and Scout, were here under a completely legal arrangement. The Border Patrol sometimes boards horses at private ranches when their facilities are overcrowded or under renovation. I had all the paperwork, all the proper authorizations and regular check-ins with their handlers, but somehow Sharon had gotten hold of partial documentation and was using it to craft a narrative that painted me as some kind of criminal. The next morning, I called Dana Monroe, my contact at the Border Patrol. Dana is a straight-shooting professional who's been managing their equine program for over a decade, and she was not happy to hear about Sharon's accusations. Wade, your boarding arrangement is completely legitimate and properly documented, she assured me. We've got copies of all the paperwork, including the authorization for those horses to be on your property. If someone is claiming otherwise, they're either mistaken or lying. She promised to send me certified copies of all the documentation and offered to speak with anyone who had questions about the arrangement. But while I was getting my legal ducks in a row, Sharon was escalating her campaign. Emily called to warn me that Sharon had been seen at the public library, using their computers to create what looked like official documents. She was there for hours, Emily reported, printing stuff on letterhead she brought with her and making copies of things she had in manila folders. The librarian said she seemed really secretive about what she was working on. This fit perfectly with Sharon's pattern of document manipulation and evidence fabrication. That afternoon, Sharon made her next move. She hand-delivered a letter to my door that was supposedly from the Border Patrol, demanding immediate return of their horses and threatening federal prosecution for unauthorized possession of government property. The letter looked official enough at first glance. Proper letterhead, official-sounding language, even what appeared to be a reference number. But when I looked closer, I noticed several red flags. The formatting was slightly off. The reference number didn't match the Border Patrol's standard system, and most tellingly, it was signed by someone who didn't exist in their organization. Emily and I came up with a plan to expose Sharon's document forgery, but it required getting her to show her hand publicly. We decided to stage a fake surrender. I called Sharon and, in my most defeated voice, told her I was ready to apologize and make things right. You were right about everything, I said, layering on the false humility. I should have listened to you from the beginning. I want to make a public apology at the next HOA meeting and accept whatever consequences you think are appropriate. I could practically hear Sharon's ego inflating through the phone. The HOA meeting Sharon organized for my public confession was her biggest production yet. She'd invited what seemed like half the county, including people who weren't even HOA members, and set up multiple cameras to record what she clearly expected to be her moment of ultimate triumph. She introduced the meeting by reading from her fake Border Patrol letter and declaring that I had agreed to confess my crimes publicly. Tonight, we will see justice served and this community protected from those who think they're above the law. Emily and I arrived with our own recording equipment, and I played my part perfectly. I stood up, looked appropriately ashamed, and began my confession. Sharon, you've opened my eyes to how wrong I've been, I said, watching her practically glow with satisfaction. I should have been more transparent about the horses on my property. In fact, I think everyone should see exactly what kind of evidence you've been collecting. That's when I nodded to Emily, who started playing the drone footage on her laptop, connected to the room's projection system. The room erupted as neighbors watched high-definition video of Sharon trespassing on my property, tampering with evidence, and literally dumping substances into my pond to make it look contaminated. But the real bombshell came when Emily played the audio of Sharon coaching her fake environmental expert to lie about contamination levels. "Make sure you mention the contamination levels," Sharon's voice echoed through the room, followed by her frustrated argument with the actor when he refused to lie about water quality. Sharon's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again as she realized what was happening. She tried to grab the laptop, shouting, "This is doctored footage, this is fake." But the audio kept playing, including her own voice, clearly identifying herself and discussing her plans to fabricate evidence. Her carefully orchestrated public triumph was collapsing in real time, and everyone in the room was watching it happen. The coup de grace came when Dana Monroe walked into the room, having driven down from the Border Patrol office after I'd called her earlier. She stood up, showed her credentials, and addressed the room directly. "I'm here to clarify some misinformation that's been circulating about Border Patrol horses," she announced. "Wade Thompson has a legitimate, properly documented agreement to board 2 of our horses. Anyone claiming otherwise is either mistaken or deliberately spreading false information." She then looked directly at Sharon and added, "Impersonating federal officers or forging federal documents is a serious crime that we take very seriously." Sharon's clipboard clattered to the floor as the room turned to stare at her. Her moment of triumph had become her moment of exposure, and she knew it. Emily leaned over and whispered loud enough for nearby neighbors to hear, "Guess your Hollywood dreams didn't work out after all." Sharon scrambled to collect her scattered papers, muttering about conspiracies and frame jobs, but the damage was done. Her credibility was shattered, her methods exposed, and her reign of HOA terror was finally coming to an end. The fallout from Sharon's exposed lies was swift and merciless. Within hours of the meeting, I had calls from 3 different HOA board members apologizing for taking Sharon's complaint seriously and asking how they could help repair the damage she'd caused. Tom Hargrove showed up the next morning with a warrant to search Sharon's house for evidence of mail theft and document forgery, armed with witness statements from neighbors who'd finally found the courage to speak up about her intimidation tactics. Emily organized what she called a Truth and Reconciliation meeting at the community center, where neighbors who'd been victims of Sharon's schemes could share their stories without fear of retaliation. The testimonies were eye-opening. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly widow, had been fined $300 for having unauthorized garden decorations, a ceramic gnome her late husband had given her. The Martinez family had been threatened with liens against their property for allegedly violating architectural standards that didn't exist in the actual HOA bylaws. Sharon had been systematically bullying and financially exploiting her neighbors for months, using fabricated rules and forged documents to maintain her power. I took the opportunity to present a comprehensive case against Sharon, complete with drone footage, audio recordings, and documentation of her various schemes. Dana Monroe attended as well, bringing official Border Patrol documentation that proved beyond any doubt that my horse boarding arrangement was legitimate. She also brought some disturbing news. Sharon had actually tried to file false reports with federal authorities, claiming I was harboring stolen government property. This kind of false reporting wastes taxpayer resources and can carry serious criminal penalties, Dana explained to the assembled crowd. Sharon, meanwhile, was spiraling. She tried to rally support by claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy, that I had somehow orchestrated an elaborate frame job with the help of corrupt officials. She even attempted to file counter-complaints with the county, claiming that my drone surveillance violated her privacy rights. But with video evidence of her trespassing on my property and tampering with evidence, her complaints fell on deaf ears. Tom was building a solid case against her that included mail theft, harassment, evidence tampering, and impersonating federal officials. The HOA board called emergency meeting to address what they diplomatically termed leadership concerns. The evidence against Sharon was overwhelming, and board members who'd been intimidated by her tactics for months finally found their voices. They presented her with a formal letter demanding her resignation and threatening legal action if she continued her harassment campaigns against community members. Sharon's response was to threaten to sue everyone in sight, but her legal threats rang hollow when she couldn't afford a lawyer and her credibility was completely shot. Emily had been doing more research into Sharon's background, and what she found was disturbing. Sharon hadn't just lost her real estate license for document manipulation, she'd actually served 6 months of probation for fraud. She'd been caught creating fake inspection reports and forging signatures on disclosure documents. This woman has been running the same scams for years, Emily told me as we reviewed her findings. She moves to a new community, gets herself into a position of authority, and then starts exploiting people who don't know how to fight back. The turning point came when Sharon made one final, desperate attempt to salvage her position. She filed a federal lawsuit against me, claiming that my horse boarding operation violated environmental regulations and that I had bribed Border Patrol officials to provide false documentation. The lawsuit was so poorly written and legally frivolous that it was dismissed within days, but it gave Dana Monroe the evidence she needed to pursue federal charges against Sharon for filing false reports and attempting to obstruct a federal investigation. When the sheriff's deputies arrived at Sharon's house with arrest warrants, neighbors lined the streets to watch. This woman who terrorized them with fake authority and fabricated rules was finally facing real consequences for her actions. As they led her away in handcuffs, she was still shouting about conspiracies and frame jobs, but nobody was listening anymore. Her reign of HOA terror was officially over. The HOA board moved quickly to undo the damage Sharon had caused. They rescinded all the bogus fines she'd imposed, revised the community rules to eliminate the arbitrary regulations she'd invented, and established clear procedures to prevent any future abuse of authority. Emily was elected as the new HOA president in a landslide vote, running on a platform of transparency and actual adherence to the legal HOA bylaws. I stood by my pond that evening, watching Ranger and Scout splash around with my other horses, feeling a sense of justice finally served. The water was as clear and clean as it had always been, reflecting the Texas sunset in ripples of gold and orange. Sharon had tried to turn my little piece of paradise into a battlefield, but truth and persistence had won out in the end. My property, my horses, and my reputation were all intact, while Sharon was facing federal charges and community exile. The best part was the support from neighbors who'd been too scared to speak up before. People stopped by throughout the week to apologize for believing Sharon's lies and to thank me for standing up to her bullying. Mrs. Peterson brought me homemade cookies and shared stories about her husband's military service. The Martinez family invited me over for dinner and asked for advice about starting their own small livestock operation. The community that Sharon had tried to divide with fear and suspicion was coming together stronger than ever. 3 months later, I was hosting the biggest barbecue my ranch had ever seen. The charges against Sharon had stuck. She'd been convicted of mail theft, harassment, document forgery, and filing false federal reports. She'd been sentenced to 2 years of probation, community service, and ordered to pay restitution to everyone she'd financially harmed with her fake fines and fabricated violations. The total came to nearly $20,000, which she'd have to pay back through garnished wages from whatever job she could find with a criminal record. Tom Hargrove was manning the grill, sharing more stories about the most ridiculous complaints he'd ever received during Sharon's reign of terror. Dana Monroe had driven down from Border Patrol headquarters with her husband and kids, eager to see the famous pond that had caused so much drama. Emily was holding court near the dessert table, entertaining guests with dramatic reenactments of Sharon's most outrageous moments, complete with clipboard props and exaggerated Karen voice impressions. The horses seemed to sense the celebratory mood. Thunder, Whisper, and Storm were putting on a show in the pond, splashing and playing, while Ranger and Scout watched, regally from the shore like distinguished guests at a pool party. Dana's kids were fascinated by the Border Patrol horses, and I spent a good hour explaining their training and the important work they did patrolling our nation's borders. It was the kind of peaceful, friendly gathering that Sharon's toxic presence had made impossible for so long. Emily stood up to make a toast as the sun began to set over the rolling Texas hills. "To Wade Thompson," she announced, raising her beer bottle, "for proving that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to let them dig their own grave deep enough to fall into it." The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. These were my people, my community, and Sharon's attempt to tear us apart had only made us stronger. The evening's entertainment reached its peak when Mrs. Peterson presented me with a custom wooden sign she'd commissioned from a local craftsman. It read, "Thompson Ranch, where horses swim free and Karens get served justice." The sign was beautifully carved and painted, and she'd even included small horse silhouettes around the border. "This is for standing up to that horrible woman," she said with tears in her eyes. "My Harold would have loved to see Sharon get her comeuppance." As the party wound down and guests began heading home, I found myself standing alone by the pond, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the water. The horses had settled down for the evening, grazing peacefully in the nearby pasture, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the distant hum of conversation from the few remaining guests. This was exactly how it should be, peaceful, natural, and free from the manufactured drama of petty tyrants. Dana approached as I was lost in thought, carrying her sleeping daughter who'd worn herself out playing with the horses. "Wade, I want you to know that what happened here has become something of a legend at our office," she said quietly. "We deal with a lot of false reports and fabricated complaints, but Sharon's case was particularly egregious. The way you handled it, documenting everything, staying within the law, letting her expose herself, that's textbook how to deal with harassment and fraud." A few weeks later, I started getting emails from people in other communities who'd heard about the Sharon situation through news coverage and social media. They wanted advice on dealing with their own HOA tyrants and neighborhood bullies. Apparently, my story had struck a nerve with people who'd been suffering under similar petty dictators but didn't know how to fight back effectively. I found myself becoming an accidental expert on documenting harassment and exposing fraudulent authority figures. Emily suggested I write a guide for dealing with HOA abuse, and the idea grew into something bigger. We created a comprehensive resource covering everything from documenting harassment to understanding your legal rights to building community support against bullying neighbors. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of downloads in the first week, with testimonials from people who'd successfully used our strategies to expose corrupt HOA board members and neighborhood tyrants in their own communities. The best vindication came 6 months later, when Sharon tried to make a comeback. She'd apparently learned nothing from her legal troubles and attempted to get herself elected to the HOA board of a community 3 towns over. But word of her history had spread, and the residents there were ready for her. They'd researched her background, documented her past behavior, and when she showed up to the election meeting with her usual clipboard and manufactured authority, they were waiting with questions she couldn't answer and evidence she couldn't refute. I was sitting by my pond one evening, checking emails from grateful community activists around the country, when I got a message that made me smile. It was from the HOA board president in Sharon's new target community. Dear Wade, just wanted to let you know that Sharon Buckley showed up here trying to pull the same scams she pulled on you. Thanks to your documentation and the resources you provided, we were ready for her. She left town the same day we confronted her with the evidence. Keep fighting the good fight. As I closed my laptop and looked out over the clear water where my horses had always belonged, I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Sharon had thought she was the law, the authority, the one in control. But in the end, she'd taught me something valuable about the power of truth, documentation, and community solidarity. Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully isn't to fight them on their terms. It's to let them reveal their true nature while you carefully document every lie, every abuse of power, every moment of manufactured outrage. The pond reflected the stars now, peaceful and undisturbed, just as it had been for generations before Sharon arrived and would be for generations after she was gone. This was my land, my home, my piece of Texas heaven, where horses could swim free and neighbors could live without fear of petty tyrants. Sharon had tried to take that away, but she'd forgotten one crucial thing. Truth has a way of rising to the surface no matter how much mud you try to stir up to hide it. Thanks for watching this wild drama unfold. What do you think of Sharon's spectacular downfall? Have you ever dealt with an HOA Karen in your neighborhood? Drop your stories in the comments and subscribe for more epic tales of justice served.